Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another special edition of WOWSA Live with our host, Ned Dennison. Ned?
Hello, everyone. I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have another one of our honorees to this today, David Alleva, PhD. David, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everyone.
David, tell us about your swimming career before you joined the professional circuit in about 1988, please.
Sure, Ned. Number one, thanks for doing this. I've been looking forward to meeting you and Steve for a while. My dad actually was a swimmer, and he got all four of us kids into swimming at a really early age. 3, 4, 5 years old. Summer pools, and then after that, we all moved to Fairfax, Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., and I joined. We all joined a big USA swim club called Starlet Aquatic Club in Fairfax, Virginia. It was within walking distance from our house, so we all started swimming there. Even master's team for my dad and mother. And that's where I really took off in swimming. The head coach there was Holger Dietz, and just did an amazing job of turning out a lot of world-class swimmers and a few Olympians. And so, that was 4.5 hours a day pool swimming, 2 hours before school, 2.5 after school. I have to admit, I was tired my whole life from probably 10 years old to after, college at 23 or 4, constantly sniffing chlorine all day. And it was a wonderful life. We got to travel the world, definitely every year going to big national races. So that was Starlet Aquatic Club, and then I got a scholarship to Indiana University, and that's of course where Doc Councilman, my swim coach, was still there. He passed away in 2004, but I went there. I think it's 82 to 86, and it's there where I met James Kegley. He was the assistant coach for distance swimming, and I was a distance swimmer. And so sometimes James would get in the water with us and work out alongside, on some big sets. So he kept in shape. And after college, he said, Dave, don't quit swimming, because I wanted to get my PhD in immunology, and I was ready to, getting into grad school. And he said, why don't you swim this interesting thing called marathon swimming? And I said, well, Jim, that's just a name, right? Marathon, you don't actually swim marathons, right? He goes, no. They're 26-mile races. I go, how long does it take? He said, well, it's about 8, 10, 12 hours, depending on the current. And so he says, come on, do it. I've been doing this for 3 or 4 years and I love it. And this guy, Paul Asmuth, who I've always heard of, and I got to meet Paul Asmuth through this. And so James got me into my first race in 1988. And it was in Lake Lac Métro-Magog in Montreal. And it was amazing that, it was a different style of swimming for me. Pool swimming is very intense. You got to be very fine-tuned, and very strong. And I thought a mile, the 1650 or 1500 meters was long. Those are all about 15-minute races. But now we're talking about 8 to 10-hour races, and it was something I just didn't fathom. But when I got to Lake Métro-Magog, the whole town of a couple of million people would come from Montreal to this little ritzy town called Magog, a little harbor town with sailboats everywhere, and they would have 7 days or 10 days of festivities. Beatlemania would come in, and everything would lead up to this big long race. so it was interesting. We'd spend the whole time in Canada there for 1 week before the race. The press would come by every breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They never treated me like that in pool swimming at all. And everyone wanted to get to know you as a swimmer. So I have to admit, it was, in some ways, it was refreshing. It was a little easier to be a star at one of the marathons because very few people can do it. And if you have the guts enough to do it, then you'd automatically be in the papers and all that. So that was a bit strange. They'd actually have us in a parade. But then we got on with the race the last day. We'd actually have to drive back into the US. So we had to drive to another country and then swim back in to the country that was hosting the race. It was funny, on all of our passports, the customs agent, when we would drive back after the race back to the US, customs couldn't figure out how we got into their country because no one stamped it as we swam back in. So that caused some problems here and there.
Did you have any kind of warm-up swim before you ended up in Magog? Did you do a 5 miler or a 10 miler, or you just went from the pool up there not having a clue? Not
having a clue, ever. So, but I said, how hard could it be? I'll just try it. And what happened is I took it out as I would normally take, a mile swim, a 15-minute swim, and I was a good, probably half mile to a mile, I think, ahead of everyone at six and a half hours. And I go, wow, this is easy. This is like this. And then all of a sudden I hit this wall that was so painful. I couldn't, I never thought my body could, in my mind, ache that much. And it was a 9.5 hour race. And I remember hitting this really hard pain wall about 6.5 hours into it. And I remember Diego Degano, he was a star at the time, just starting out with me. He's a newcomer to the whole field. And I think Rob Schmidt, another buddy of mine who went to Berkeley, they both passed me. So I ended up getting third. And there's a picture of me afterwards that the newspaper had where there are two ladies from the organization. They both had me on either side of me and the pain on my face. And that was Dave Alleva's debut into marathon swimming. And I vowed never to do it again. And yet the next year I came back and I believe the next swim after that was Atlantic City in 1989. I won the race. And then very quickly after that, I think I did a couple of more that summer, all within 3 weeks. And I was like, wow, wasn't as in a good a shape as I was in the first one, but I think my mind and body experienced this connection that had nothing to do with the level of shape I was in. It was more of a learning muscle and mental together. It's the strangest thing. I can't even explain it today, but over the years, I started doing 5 or 6 of these within a 2 or 3 month period in the summer. And I look back on that and I look at myself today and I said, that's a different person back then.
So as painful as it was at 6.5 hours, do you remember the pain of seeing somebody like Diego go by you at 7.5 hours? Do you have this distinct memory of going, it can't be any more painful than the first one passes you and the second one passes you?
That is, well, you know what? I have to admit, that's a bit painful, but it was more painful just thinking, when is this going to end? Why did I ever do this? But only afterwards did I really, I will say afterwards, this is part of the pain that I had to figure out and live with. Typically, if you work out really hard, anybody, and you could run or do a big soccer game or something, and you're really aching, typically you can just lie down, have some water, and just rest a bit, and you feel good. Well, after this first race, if you lie down, the lactic acid build would be so great that you'd have to stand up again and walk around just to curb the pain. I started taking pills that people get, like Motrin or Advils, and they would last maybe 10 minutes at the most. So for several hours after the race, I couldn't just lie down. I'd had to be active and walking around. And of course, that was incredibly painful. I said, why did I ever do this? But I will say it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. But it's such a life lesson, and it's, I think most of my colleagues that did marathon swimming know that once you do this, you're not afraid of anything in life. Did
you change your training after that first big swim?
Yes. I changed the way I stroke. So I personally finally realized that in contrast to pool swimming, where you want to pull through all the way and every stroke is a powerful stroke, in marathon swimming, I learned how to spin as a cyclist would, high rep, and not a lot of power per stroke. And that did it for me. That next year I won Atlantic City. I was holding over 80 strokes a minute, which is, that's not typical for most swimmers. And I wasn't pushing and following through. I wasn't finishing through. It was all up front. And I learned how to just float my butt and didn't kick that much because over kicking in this sport will tire you out beyond belief. So I learned how to stroke much better, and I applied that all through the winter in my workouts in the pool.
And was this something you came up with? Is this Kegley or Councilman or changing your stroke at 2021, 22, 23, it's an unusual thing.
Yeah, and swimming's a strange thing. My father was a swimmer and all of his friends at that age, and they kept asking me, David, they always wanted to go through the mechanics of swimming. And I kept telling them, swimming is so unique per person. My coach, Doc Councilman at Indiana, one of the major things he did was started filming swimmers underwater. Mark Spitz, Gary Hall, Jim Montgomery. And he would map out how these guys would stroke through and turn their bodies and all this. And he came up with some principles that did change swimming, but ultimately he said, you've got to do what works for you. And that's why even in the Olympics, you'll see guys' strokes very different. It's an art of a sport, and it's not that mechanical, in my opinion.
Let me take you to Italy, 1990, 36-kilometer Capri, Naples. In that day, probably the biggest event in the sport. You beat 14 honorees, and you won it by more than 8 minutes. Was this the best moment in maybe your whole swimming career? And tell us about the afters. After the other guys came in, it was a while before they all got in.
Yeah, Ned, thanks for bringing that up, because it's a race that actually gets to my heart. I'm an Italian American, and I had never been to Italy before. In fact, my buddy Rob Schmidt was in the race the previous year, and he said he gave me specific instructions about how to travel there and take a flight to Rome, and then you get on a train down to Naples, and then you get on this ferry and you go out to Capri, and you got to be there 10 days in advance. And I want you to stay in this little bed and breakfast. They call it a pension. And I was up for 2 days of travel, just from driving here and there and trying to save money as a youngster. And I finally get to Capri at 11 or at night or so. No, not a soul is up. And I walked up and down this big hill, about a mile up, mile down in August, with all of these bags and luggage. Of course, I was in great shape then, but I went up and down, couldn't find my little bed and breakfast. I finally found it. These two very short ladies, literally 4 feet high, come out there, and they, "Oh, Alleva, come on in." And I just finally rested after 48 hours. I woke up the next day, and it was the most beautiful island place I've ever seen. And of course, this guy made a great prosciutto and mozzarella sandwich for me, and I go, "Oh, this is so good." And I just fell in love with the place for the 10 days that we were there. I met up with all the other swimmers, and every day we would swim around the island into this blue grotto. It's a cave that's naturally crystal blue, and we all had this wonderful experience there. Come race day, I was just feeling great. I can't explain it, but just felt great. I kept swimming every day, for the 10 days I was there. I will say this. The Mediterranean is so salty that you're much more buoyant there than all the other races. So me learning how to float, remember I said I figured out how to keep my butt up and not really kick. Well, that lent itself to the Mediterranean Sea. I just flew across there. I can't explain it, but and it was only less than 7 hours, I think, for me. And it was in one of the easier swims. I always thought Diego would catch up. And I think what happened with Diego's boat is they took him a little bit off course, as I recalled. So he had some extra mileage to catch up to me. My boat, in Italy, there's a big naval ship that we all follow. And so I think my boat did a great job of just following that ship about a mile or two ahead of us. Afterwards, of course, it was very interesting, the big banquet, and every governor and mayor and military official was there. And so it was a very well organized and funded event. And each one of these government officials had to give their own trophy. So here we are in the middle of Naples, leaving a banquet around, I'm going to say midnight, with all of these 6 trophies on me. And of course, they gave me cash. It was about $12,000 of lira. Back then was, 1,000 lira to $1 or something. So it was a big wad of cash they gave us. It wasn't a check. It was, and then they send you out into the city of Naples to go back to your hotel. So here I am drawing attention to me with trophies and all this cash, and that was, wow. But it was such a memorable trip.
Let me take you across the Atlantic again, back to Quebec. You and Diego Degano from Argentina and Shelley Taylor-Smith from Australia, you 3 battled it out in Quebec in just about every one of those swims. Sometimes you won, sometimes Shelley won, sometimes Diego won. Tell us about those 2 as competitors.
Yeah, what a privilege it is to swim with them. You know, after a couple of years of this, we're just great friends. And it might look like we're so competitive, and we are in the water, but it was a different style of competitiveness. A lot of it, sometimes I'd go to Diego boat when he was hurting, or even Shelly. I go, come on, get going. Don't stop, or don't, and that's the way it was on each one of these races. Of course, the last couple of hours, if we're close to each other, all that's off. we're trying to get, we're trying to really come in first. And both of them, they looked at this as a full-time job. I was going through my PhD in immunology this whole time. And so it was really difficult for me to put in a lot of hours, because I'm doing research around the clock 7 days a week. It just didn't stop. And I'm trying to get a workout in for an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. But they were going a good strong 4-5 hours a day. I mean, they were really, really going for it. And that's why over time, from 1988 when I started to about 1993 when I got my degree, it was time for me to really stop the competitiveness. There's no way I could keep it up. But those two, and I really have the utmost respect for both of them. I mean, Shelly did something so amazing for a female swimmer to beat most of the guys consistently. That is an incredible feat. And Diego, he really had it. He worked hard at it, and he won, and it paid off. And so anyway, it's a real privilege to swim with both of them. I've always prided myself by saying I never got out of a race. I think I did close to 30 of these and never quit. And, I think that, I was talking to Shelly at one point about it, and she goes, yeah, Dave, I noticed that. I think she got out once or twice maybe, but I forget. But that's one thing that I never did, is I said, well, I could lose it. I can lose, but I'm never going to get out.
Long after your elite racing career was over, you swam Boston Light a couple of times. Tell us about the special joy of going 12.6 kilometers as opposed to 40 kilometers.
Yeah. So I was, I just got married, and we moved to Boston area for my postdoctoral research at BU Medical Center. And so that's kind of in the southern part of Boston. And in South Boston, there was this race. And at the pool in Boston University Medical Center, I met a really good friend of mine, Art Lutzchanik, and he was a swimmer. And he said, David, get into this race. It's the oldest, if I get this right, the oldest open water swim in America. Is that right?
That's the marketing. I have to believe them.
Yeah, that's the marketing. So I said, wow, well, I got to check it out. And sure enough, it's a bunch of little islands right off the coast of South Boston. And the original lighthouse, the first lighthouse in America, still stands on one of the islands. And you go out there, and there's probably 60, 70 swimmers, a lot of swimmers that do it. And you swim in, I think it's about 8 miles. And the first time I did it, I think I won it by over a half an hour or so. And then the next year I won it again, a little slower by 5 minutes. And it took me in moving back up here last year. I just didn't know the race was still going on. And apparently I still hold the record back from 1995. So I think I'm going to start doing it again. They canceled it for this year.
I talked to them about it before the interview, and they went, yeah, he was okay in the old days, but we have to give him a bit of a trial and make sure he can still do the distance.
Well, give me 1 year, give me summer, and I can assure you I can float my way back in. I don't think I can win it, but
Many of the professional racers also dabbled in the sort of the big epic solo swims. I don't see your name on any of those. Were you not tempted to head off to the English Channel or swim across Lake Ontario or something like this?
well, I have to admit, I feel that when my first daughter was born in 2000, but maybe a little bit before that, we had moved to San Diego in 1998, right after my postdoc, and I got my first job in industry in biotech. And at that time, I just kind of retired from swimming, and I was only in my mid 30s, but I put so much time into swimming and intensely, and I took it very seriously. I switched my interest, and I tell people I actually retired from something at age 35. I didn't quit, but it was a major change of life. And ever since then, I haven't been that motivated to get back into that sport. But in my heart, I just love to do it again. And so, now that I'm in my mid 50s, and I'm back in Boston, and there's a Boston Light swim available to me, I'm thinking that it's about time that I get back into it.
So I've sketched it out for you. Kegley's not here to do it for you, who coached you at one point. So 2021, we got you done for the 8-mile Boston Light. In 2022, we'll bring you back to your roots. There's the double Menfrey. You do out and back on the lake, because you've already done it a couple of times one way. So you're already familiar with the course. Shouldn't be any trouble to do a flip turn at one end and come back. It's about 50 miles or something. You'd be fine.
Easy. Well, Ned, one thing about what actually caused me to start thinking about, just retiring, there was a race, and then this is probably in 1993, I believe, one of my last World Series races in marathon swimming. It was Lac Saint Jean. In that race, and I think this is 92, 93, the water was incredibly cold that year, incredibly cold. It was in the low 60s to high 50s the whole way. And again, this is me not as in the best shape as I was several years before. And yet I did it. I didn't get out. I actually ended up getting second. I forget who won it. May have been Claudio Plitt who won it. Everyone else, most got out. It was just too cold. And I remember getting out of that race and just walking out kind of in a daze, but feeling great. 9.5 hours in literally 56 to 58 degree water. And my wife, I remember, was touching me and said, and other people were going, "David, you're so cold, you feel dead." They put me on a stretch in the medical tents, and I still felt fine. And then they put hot packs on me. And that's when the problem started. My periphery started warming up, and I started uncontrollably shivering. My arms were flailing, my legs were flailing. I couldn't control it. And to me, it was very serious. The other nurses were kind of laughing, going, "Oh, no, you're just shivering." I never shivered like this before. And that was one of the last races I said, there are definitely easier ways to make money. and I kind of fizzled out, I think, that next year from it. But they're all great memories.
Last question for you. We've asked many of our interviewees about COVID and the effect on them, the fact that they're not able to go to the swimming pool and their races are canceled. You've got a slightly different perspective on COVID. Tell us what you're up to now.
Sure. Well, I'm working in a biotech company, and our major focus is making products, therapies for type 1 diabetes. I'm an immunologist, so we're trying to prevent diabetes, almost like a vaccine for diabetes. Now, since COVID came, most biotech companies had to pivot a bit from their normal programs into the COVID area. And so we're making a COVID vaccine. We also have a COVID antibody test. And so we're very excited about it. And, our proprietary angle on the vaccine, we think it's going to be very safe and very effective. And we're a small company. So, a lot of the big funding in the race to get a vaccine on the market has been with the big pharmas. And yet, we'll see how all of these turn out, but I will say there's 170 different companies working on COVID vaccines.
And are you including the Russian government as one of those companies?
Oh, sure. And there's a lot of lip service out there too, but all of us that are serious about it, we're very excited to bring this to the public as soon as possible.
Well, David, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your future contribution to the well-being of the world. And I know the organizers of Boston Light extremely well. I'll make sure you don't get forgotten in your preparations for next year. I'll make sure they hound you for your application.
Ned, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.